I want to get to our last call for tonight. Let's go to Jake in Washington. Jake, how are you doing?
Hello, doing good. Hello, Dan and Suris.
Yes, you are live with Dan and Suris on Truth Wanted. Jake, what can we do for you?
It's good to talk to you again. I called in last week, but I was listening to the call you had, I think it was the first call, about pragmatism, and I had some thoughts I just wanted to share and get your take on.
Yeah, share those thoughts.
Yeah, so I have kind of for a long time been very against pragmatism, the idea that what is useful should be a value above what is true. And that is because I think that truth should be the ultimate priority, because literally
the truth should be wanted, is what you're saying. It needs to be wanted.
The truth should be wanted.
Got it. Just wanted to clarify. Just wanted to make
just
sure.
Like this show's name.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Just clarifying.
Well, and the reason for that is because all of our decisions and everything we feel, all of our perspectives is based on our perspective of what the truth is, like what reality is.
Yep.
So I think that if someone holds a belief that is not true, then it will necessarily do some form of damage in certain areas in their lives.
I don't know about necessarily.
Maybe not always, depending on the belief.
Right.
So the contention I would hold, and granted, I don't necessarily comport with the pragmatic theory of truth, but I think the idea that there are going to be some negatives to believing in something based on it not comporting with reality, I agree that can happen. I don't agree that necessarily will happen, and I would also say that maybe, again, this is the pragmatist of me speaking, but we don't view these things in whether or not there are some negative consequences. We usually view these things in whether or not there is a net gain or a net loss, a net positive or a net negative. So if there's a bunch of negative stuff that happens as a result of a belief, that negative stuff can come from it being true or false. And positive things can come from a true or false belief. What we really have to evaluate is if you're dealing with strictly pragmatic theory of truth, what you have to evaluate is the net gain or net loss, not whether or not there are certain individual aspects that are good or bad.
Well, and I believe that if someone does not hold truth as their ultimate priority over usefulness, then in the long run, it will necessarily lead to damage. And I think that if people as a whole, as a society, valued the truth above all else, that we could eventually eliminate most, if not all, of the suffering in the world.
You know what I think, though, Jake? I think that people do value truth more than what you and I might think, but their way of getting to truth might not be the best way. And what they understand as truth isn't really true.
And not to mention, there's a couple of things to unpack with the truth claim. So it can be argued that even from a pragmatic point, what is true would ultimately be what leads to more useful and practical application. Again, unless we're talking something like politics, because there are some politicians that view lying as infinitely more useful. But the reason that you can have a kind of
Jake, you got a siren.
That's a lovely sound.
Yeah.
The reason there's a lot of nuance in this is when we're talking about pragmatism. Pragmatism is a very recent philosophy. If we're comparing it to other philosophical positions, 1870s, you've got where the movement really began as the pragmatic maxim. I can't remember who fucking did it. Sorry for language.
Pragmatic Max.
But then
that was his name. He made the Max.
No, it was not. Oh, it was Charles Sanders. Sorry.
Okay.
It was not Max.
Pragmatic Max was his name.
A guy named Max.
School,
it was Pragmatic Max.
Pragmatic Max.
But then there were other people who ended up building on his base idea of pragmatism. John Dewey and William James both built on that in the 20th century. But none of these philosophers, like these three people, never agreed with what each other thought about pragmatism. They never agreed with one another. They had conflicting views on how this epistemology should function. And that's kind of one of the reasons why you can have a really nuanced position that still comports with pragmatism. Like truth ultimately being more useful than anything else, because what is true will lead to more useful applications. I think that's Dewey's school of thought more than anything. But because
I have an
there's
argument on that too.
Ooh,
what's up? Okay, cool.
It's heating up. It's heating up. Go for it, Jake.
The truth is always better than falsehood, because if you hold a true belief, that is the only way that you can create a plan to action based on what is actually true. If you hold beliefs that are not true, then your plans to action will be based on faulty beliefs. So it's possible that based on faulty beliefs, you could create a plan to action that works out for you in the end, but you will have a better likelihood of getting a good plan based on true beliefs.
Okay, and again, if we're going at, if somebody in my chat is more familiar with Dewey's writings than me, please let me know. But if memory serves, this is from Dewey's thought. That's in line with how I believe John Dewey viewed pragmatism, is that the more useful and more likely beneficial outcomes would come from something being true first. And it's one of the reasons why he would pursue truth, because it was pragmatic to pursue it.
So his view is that, well, then that's not really pragmatism, is it? Because pragmatism is what is useful is more valuable than what is true. But that his view would be that what is true is more valuable than what is useful, because what is useful.
Well, not it, so pragmatism isn't, if we're using just a broad sense. Again, there's three like main schools of philosophy on pragmatism, and they all disagree with one another. So saying pragmatism is one thing automatically shows a problem with how one's viewing pragmatism, because pragmatism is not one thing.
You think it would
pragmatism
be more
is many contradictory, competing ideas.
You think it would be more pragmatic to have one definition of pragmatism?
You think it would?
You think
I agree with that.
You know what I mean?
But in a broad sense, pragmatism is just an approach that assesses the truth value of a theory or belief in terms of its practical application. That's not saying that the usefulness of something is more important than the truth. It's saying that the truth value would comport with its practical application.
Okay. Well, how I usually hear people use it is in saying, like, in a response to, if you're having a debate with somebody about Christianity or about, like, believing in psychic powers or something, in my experience, usually people will bring up pragmatism in order to say, like, well, it doesn't really matter what's true because this is useful to me, and that's more important than what is actually true, is what's more useful to me.
And that is a fair criticism, but that's a criticism of someone's personal idea of usefulness, not the epistemology of pragmatism. But I do understand that contention, and I agree, because ultimately there's a huge issue with pragmatism, and that issue is that what is seen as useful is always going to come down to what the end goal is. So, for instance, if somebody's end goal is glorification of God, like this is an evangelical thing, like glorifying God is above everything else, right? If that's their end goal, then even under pragmatism, literally everything must be done for the glory of God, because it's useful towards the end goal to do that. That would be my contention using pragmatism there. Not that they're saying that belief in something is more important. It's asking, well, what is that belief in the end goal? If that belief is to glorify their God, that's all they want to do. It's kind of hard to argue somebody out of that position in that way. But if there are other things that are entailed by that, for instance, I think that the world, if somebody says, I think the world would be a better place if more people were Christian, or if people are Christian, or people believe in Christian values, then you can kind of point to some Christian values that aren't necessarily useful, just keeping them within that frame. There are Christian beliefs that are not useful towards building a better functioning society. For instance, take the NIFB as an example. Their particular, not using them as the litmus test for Christianity, but their particular views on Jewish people, on homosexuals, on any stuff like that.
On you,
it's on me. Yeah. Putting my face on a thing and firing a gun at it repeatedly. Yeah, that's a thing on me. Like their views on that are not, they're not useful to creating a society that's cohesive, that contains multiple different types of people. That's only useful insofar as creating a society with only one type of person who lives in an echo chamber. And in that case, you have to ask, well, is it useful to even create a society that's nothing but an echo chamber? I'd argue that it's not. But again, all of that's not a criticism so much of the epistemology. It's just people's personal usage.
Right. Yeah, I find that usually, at least my take on it, I could be wrong, but I think that usually people who are making the argument that, well, what is valuable to me is more important than what's true, have never really tried looking at things from a different angle than that and seeing how that affects them over kind of a longer period of time.
I find it to be a hasty justification for a belief without...
Yeah, if somebody just says, like, believing in God is useful to me, and like, well, yeah, it's useful to you, but it's useful to you in what end? Like, what are the actual ends of it?
And maybe this is, the conversations I've had with Suris, that I've had with other people is, like, they didn't have a reason until I just asked them at that point. And then they came up with that. Like that. No, seriously. Like I think that's what happens.
I think in a lot of ways they do. Like a lot of times they're either going to have one, and this is not me trying to like throw all Christians under the bus, but a lot of times they'll have A or B, the one they pulled out of their butt immediately, or probably what also happens sometimes is they'll pull the one their pastor told them to say.
Or they realize in that moment that the reason that they had previously thought wasn't as good, so they search for another one. You know what I mean?
They go. I'm not really confident in this one. Maybe maybe I need to say something better, something that makes me sound a little smarter.
Because
and it's like,
the
thing you pulled out of your butt did not sound smarter.
You're exactly right, because it's like, okay, like saying that I prayed and then I found my car keys. Well, that sounds kind of dumb out loud. Maybe if I say, well, it's because of this, if you take the Bible into context, or if you do this, and then you start to come up with these kinds of justifications and stuff. I think that's a lot more common, because not
a lot of post hoc rationalization.
Yeah, a lot of because not everybody's. I certainly wasn't an apologist. I didn't even know what apologetics was till I was at least a teenager. So
I wasn't aware, and this is weird because I'm in like obviously in the nerd community, which I would argue has just as many apologists as the religious community.
Here's the thing: your knowledge of truth is entirely justified by how many anime posters are in your room. Okay, so you have the most.
There's
truth,
actually more than the camera shows, right?
Yeah. Oh, I bet, dude. So like, you're the most honest, most truthful person right now. That's how that. Look at that, beautiful.
There's more over there and over there.
There's
one lone poster.
That's not a room. That's a shrine. Honestly.
Well, it's also a studio, so it's many things.
No, you should call the National Park Service and see if you can get like a certificate so that your room can be protected by the national government. Because I think
can I be protected from falling trees? Because I've already had one room destroyed by one. It's right behind me.
If it's on national park property, it might get done a bit faster than you doing it yourself. You wouldn't have to pay for it at least. It'd be taxpayers. Yeah,
that would actually be super useful. That'd be great.
Think about it. I completely derailed from what we were talking about. I completely forgot what we were specific. You were talking about the nerd community and like you were
I wasn't aware of what apologetics were, even though I was a young Earth creationist and in part of the nerd community, which I would argue are two areas that have the most usage of apologetics. And if you don't believe me on the nerd community thing, just look at any PlayStation versus Xbox argument.
Yes,
and it's literally just each side either engaging in apologetics for their side or engaging in whataboutism for the other side.
Oh, geez, you brought me back there.
That's it. That's all it is.
This is a very nostalgic episode today. We're talking about 2006 again, I think. Xbox versus PS3. Which one's better?
But it does seem like maybe we've derailed a bit too far away from Jake's original point.
Enough is what it is. No, but seriously, Jake, like I do want to kind of start to wrap things up here in a bit, but like was this conversation been useful? Like, do you have any other counterpoints you want to make, or just like anything else you want to add?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I appreciate your guys' takes on that. It's been good. Really like the show.
Yeah.
And I'll call it back again in the future. But yeah, just again, I think that it's really important to emphasize the value of truth. because it's. I think that if you look like throughout human history, a lot of the suffering that's been caused is because people did not kind of collectively value truth as an ultimate priority. And I think that in a secular society we're trying to build, I think that that would be the most important value for people to have. You know, because if we're all collectively trying to find the truth above all else, and then everything else is beneath that value, because that is how it works. You know, that is how our minds work. That's how reality works. What we believe is true kind of precedes everything else. So if we're consciously seeking that out, I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, this is how the Enlightenment started. You know what I mean? Like this is how
if everybody had the same base axioms and those axioms were all positive, then I agree. Society would be better, but unfortunately, not everybody has the same base axioms.
Yeah, so like there are societies and cultures even today where it's like, your duty to family or your duty to God or your duty to religion like is the most important in your life. So, yeah, I think there's some merit to that. Really interesting. Jake, thanks again for calling, and I look forward to more conversations with you, bud.
Of course. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, see you later. Man. I look, I'm still holding you to it, man. Most posters in your room, that's it. You're the boss. You can post. I mean, you could tell me about some sort of obscure fact about Neon Genesis Evangelion, and I would just believe it.
Yeah, the fact that the last 2 episodes were actually billed as a product of budget cuts and they made movies afterwards when they had enough money.
I don't know. Hey, that budget cuts thing. That's contentious.
You just pulled a random anime out, but I happen to know about the production.
We just alienated 90% of our audience now, Suris. Thanks.
Oops.
Fans of Truth Wanted also correspond in the Venn diagram of fans of Neon Genesis Evangelion. Yeah, I think that the YouTube algorithm certainly will pick that up. For sure.
Hey, strangely enough, I have actually had people send me screenshots of their YouTube recommendations, and it has actually shown my channel in recommended anime recommendations, even though there is no reason.
There's a reason. No, sirs. There is a reason. There's a reason. There's a reason for everything, sirs. Don't you believe that? There's a reason for everything.
Oh, don't do this. Don't do this to me. Are you willing to walk down this rabbit hole?
I'm not willing to walk down this rabbit hole. Sirs, thanks so much for being on the show tonight.